Good afternoon. My name is David Gleason. I'm a clinical psychologist. For the last 25 years or so, my work has been primarily with adolescents in high-achieving and very competitive school environments, public schools and independent schools in the US, as well as international schools around the world. So it's from that perspective that I give this talk. So I'd like to start this talk by first telling you two stories. They may not seem to go with each other, but I hope that after I've told them, you'll see that they actually do. So the first story begins like many good stories, like this. It was a dark and stormy night. One of the night watchmen on the battleship deck went downstairs to wake up the captain. Captain, Captain. What is it? Sir, I'm sorry to wake you, but we have a serious problem. What? There's a ship in our sea lane several miles away, and it won't move. Well, tell it to move. We did, sir, and it still won't move. Then I'll tell it. So the captain goes up on deck, and a signal goes out. Move 20 degrees starboard at once. Signal returns. You move 20 degrees starboard at once. So the captain is feeling kind of annoyed. He sends out another signal. This is Captain Marcus Adams, ordering you to move 20 degrees starboard at once. Signal returns. This is Seaman Carl Jones, ordering you to move 20 degrees starboard at once. What arrogance, the captain thinks. Who does he think he is? We're a battleship. Sends out another signal. This is the mighty Missouri, flagship of the 7th Fleet. Signal returns. This is Seaman Carl Jones again. And this is the Lighthouse. You need to move. Stephen Covey, the late Stephen Covey, used to tell that story as part of his workshops. I'm telling it here for a slightly different purpose that you'll soon understand why. So the second story that I'd like to pair with that one is this. In 1981, David Elkind published a book called The Hurried Child, in which he described the dangers of hurrying children through their developmental years. And he talked about hurrying in terms of the crippling effects of imposing too many demands on children and adolescents before they have the developmental capacities to cope with those demands. In 1991, Elkind published the 10th anniversary edition of that book, because what it meant to be hurried in 1991 was already dramatically different than what it had meant 10 years earlier. In 2006, Elkind published the 25th anniversary edition of that book, because once again, what it meant to be hurried was dramatically different and even more dangerous than what it had meant in 1991 and in 1981. In that 2006 edition, Elkind said, and I quote, "The human brain is the ultimate scientific authority." I agree with that statement. And in my opinion, wait for it, the human brain is the ultimate scientific authority, and it is the lighthouse. The human brain is not going to move or be hurried simply because we want it to. For centuries, the human brain has been evolving on its own developmental schedule. No matter what time in history we're born, no matter into what gender we're born, no matter into what race or culture we're born, it always develops on its own schedule. Our job is to get in sync with that exquisite developmental schedule and let that guide our adolescents with our guided and balanced support to their healthy adulthood. As Elkind and many others have shown, the more we try to hurry development, the more we actually hurt it. So why am I telling you these stories? In my opinion, these two stories help to illuminate, like the Lighthouse, the conditions under which many teenagers in these highly competitive schools are facing every single day. Here's what I mean. Anxiety and depression, and the many dangerous manifestations of those conditions. Substance abuse, eating disorders, chronic sleep deprivation, cutting and self-injury, and too often suicide, are ever-increasing conditions in competitive schools across the U.S. and all around the world. So why is it that in these esteemed and prosperous environments that are so focused on students' overall progress and achievement, why are so many students struggling in such serious ways? As a psychologist who's evaluated and treated these students for the past 25 years, I've become rather familiar with these conditions, but I'm not the only one who's begun to explore them or to be concerned about them in a whole new way. Over the past 2 to 3 years, with the help of an open-ended and rather structured interview format, I've set out to investigate these concerns in many U.S. schools and in many international schools throughout Europe and many parts of Asia. And to my surprise, everyone, parents and educators alike, see and say the same things. Through my many interviews, I've accumulated hundreds of candid testimonies and have found almost complete unanimity with how these parents and educators have responded to my questions. To an alarming degree, that unanimity is this. For a host of compelling economic and cultural reasons, these dedicated and caring adults also admit to overscheduling, overworking, and at times overwhelming their students. Let's see what some of these students say. Tom is a high school junior. The school day isn't just till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Most days it goes until at least midnight, often much later. I'm usually up really late, almost every night, until like 1 or 2 in the morning. And this isn't for social reasons. This is just to get my work done. Eating is never a priority. Sleep is never a priority, ever. Clara, a sophomore, we hear from early in freshman year that we have to establish our credentials, that we're supposed to be preparing ourselves to look good for colleges. My whole life seems hijacked by the fact that I have to do more and be more all the time. It's incredibly stressful. There are a lot of instances of kids just breaking down, really horrible instances, like kids just crying at the drop of a hat, and other kids just losing it, and that just seems like a new normal. And what's really weird is that no one's really talking about it. So then I've talked with parents, and parents have similar reports. Parents say we overschedule our kids, and we micromanage their lives. We criticize them for not getting their work done and for spending too much time on social media and for not getting to bed on time. And we talk too much about where they're going to college. Educators report similar issues. We overschedule our students. We compress too much time, too much activity into an inadequate number of days and weeks. We assign too much homework. We place too much emphasis, directly and indirectly, on their grades. And we overfocus on the college process. We expect our students to think like adults and to act like adults before they've even developed those skill sets. So we have to ask ourselves, what adultness are we asking of adolescents? As I see it, the most common adult-like functioning that we're asking of adolescents may be characterized by our faulty assumptions that their executive function capacities have fully developed. Executive functions, in a few words, refer to these: taking initiative and having consistent, self-disciplined study habits, being able to organize, manage their time, their space, and their materials, particularly in the face of competing demands every day and into many nights, and being able to understand, regulate, and cope effectively with their own emotions. You may already know that executive functions are themselves capacities that develop gradually and over time, and that they're coordinated within the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the part of the brain that we now know develops last, and not fully until the late 20s and early 30s. So it's not as if teenagers just get a set of executive functions when they turn 13, as they enter the teenage years, as if it were a new tool set with which to build and shape their academic and personal identities. No, it doesn't work quite like that. These are capacities that develop very gradually over time. So isn't it ironic that these executive capacities that for most people develop last are the very skills that early adolescents at the age of 13, 14, and 15, that they need first in order to be successful in these highly competitive schools all around the world. Some students actually can fake it. I think they frequently make it look like they're managing, but often at great cost. They pull all-nighters. They walk around exhausted all the time, often on the brink of emotional breakdown, but they make it. But for many students, they don't, because it's too much pressure for them too early in their lives. Thanks to the wonders of neuroimaging, we now know with ever-increasing exactness about human brain development. And because of these extraordinary insights, I think we know exactly why so many students are experiencing so much pressure so early in their lives. Essentially, their brains just haven't yet developed the adult capacities to manage the relentless, competing, and high-pressured demands that we, as adults, admit to imposing on them. Something is very, very wrong here. This slide illustrates something that's known as the YatesDodson Law, a discovery made by these two psychologists back in 1908, over 100 years ago, where they graphed the relationship between performance and pressure, or stress level, or as this slide shows, arousal level, the way it was termed back then. As you'll see by this inverted U-shaped curve, some pressure isn't just good, it's actually necessary to achieve optimal performance. But if pressure continues, or is experienced as too much pressure, then you'll see that performance drops off precipitously and leads to significantly increased anxiety. Pain, anger, and violence, as this slide shows, or in the many forms of adolescent anxiety that we've already reviewed. So, about 20 years ago, in the context of a workshop that we were presenting together, a friend of mine, Dan Garvey of the American Youth Foundation, said, and I quote, "We are responsible for the cultures we create." I've never forgotten that statement, and I've been quoting Dan ever since. What it means for us is that as a population of well-intended parents and educators all around the world, we admit to overscheduling, overworking, and thereby overwhelming our students. Too frequently, those practices result in too much pressure for adolescents who, from a very clear and undeniable developmental perspective, are simply not ready to manage those pressures at this time in their lives. So, remember Clara, the sophomore who said that this pressure had become a new normal and that no one was really talking about it? The cumulative effect of not really talking about it is that eventually students don't just talk about it, they start screaming about it with symptoms of their own anxiety. And here they are again: substance abuse, eating disorders, self-injury, and suicide. And then I think we have to look very carefully at our own practices and our policies. We have to ask ourselves, at what cost do we continue to overschedule, overwork, and overwhelm our students? At what cost do we expect adolescents to think like adults and to act like adults before they actually are adults? Like the ship that had to chart a different course to accommodate the Lighthouse, I think we have to chart a different course too. To chart the lighthouse-like reality of adolescents' true developmental capacities. Our adolescents and our students rely on us not only to educate them, but also to take care of them. We owe it to adolescents everywhere to educate them and parent them in healthy and balanced ways, in ways that respect their development, in ways that do not hurry them or risk hurting them. Remember, we are responsible for the cultures we create. For our kids' sake, we need to acknowledge our collective responsibility in this regard, and then parent and educate adolescents accordingly. Thank you very much.